Our next guest comes to us from Seattle, Washington, but she spends a lot of her time up in Montana, and we are just thrilled to be speaking to an incredible photographer. She says professionally for the last 5 years, but I'm sure it dates further back than that, and we'll get into her story. We've been following her for quite some time, and she's been talking with a bunch of the people we've had on our show before, Leo Leckie and Rick McIntyre and such, so really happy to pick her brain about the photography space, and that is Hannah Rheaume. Hannah, it's so good to finally meet you face-to-face. How's everything going up in Seattle?
It's great to meet you. Things are good. I'm actually just returning home from a trip to Yellowstone in Montana, and I have a little bit of like the returning from the trip blues, but it's okay.
I know. It's like when you get on one of those trips and you just don't want. I just don't want to go. I want to stick here in the snow for a bit.
Well, and if like when we chat about it, you will see my frustrations in the date that I left because something happened the day I was leaving that I missed.
So that's a little teaser for everybody as you listen on to this episode of something we're going to chat about. It's always great because we're reading up on your bio, and it's always wonderful to hear the background story of how artists, visual artists, and imagery, and people who work in photography, how this whole journey begins. And really seemed like this was something that you, as a younger individual, this was something you wanted to do all the time. And I resonate with you because I took the photography class in high school also, where you had to go in the dark room and you had to, get the film and put the stuff in the solutions and all that stuff. So that was way back. I'm kind of dating myself. But anyway, for you, where did this journey begin in photography?
Yeah. It dates back, I feel like a while. I grew up in a small kind of city, I guess you could say, in Maine. So I'm from the East Coast originally. My mom always had a camera of some sort. She was always either pointing it at me or pointing it at bugs and like flora and fauna and trees. And she would take it up to camp where we would kind of go spend weekends and things like that. And so I think seeing her take photos was like this, it created this innate interest in myself where I was like, that could be cool one day. And I took a black and white photography class, was in the darkroom as well. And it stemmed from that. It was this little snowball. And I think too, growing up, I never really realized that something in the creative space could ever be a career. I don't think, I ever set out with the intention of becoming a photographer. Actually, I know I didn't ever set out to become a photographer. I went to school for communications and got a job in public relations and worked there in the consumer packaged goods kind of department where we would have clients kind of in that space. And it kind of was then that I was like, I'm not passionate about what I'm doing right now. And it was then that I reverted back to photography and actually got my own camera and picked it up and started just taking photos.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm curious what your mom's photography was like.
She was just kind of a hobbyist. She would, like I said, take pictures of like bugs and butterflies and plants and a lot of photos of me and my sister and our family and things like that. It was more of just a hobby. But I think just that example of seeing her pick up a camera, especially, I feel like, too, even to this day, I feel like it's a male-dominated industry for sure. And so to just see her pick it up set an example for me in so many ways.
Do you happen to know what type of camera she was using? Was it just like kind of a run-of-the-mill or like a disposable? What was she typically using? I know it was hobby, but still.
Yeah, she had, I think, a couple, but the one I remember pretty distinctly was a Canon. I actually have it. It was oh my gosh, it's behind me. I can't see it from here, but it was some sort of Canon. She gave me a film one to use. And then as I got older, she got obviously into digital photography too.
Wow. So your mom does she still photograph to this day? Does she still have that hobby going?
Yeah, she does. She has the camera. She doesn't do it enough. It's usually when we're together, she'll really like bring it out and we'll go take photos together sometimes.
That's awesome. That's a nice little lineage project. For you, what was it about the natural space, the natural world, landscapes, animals, things? When did so you shift into this passion, where does that fit into the photography journey? And you say, we're going to focus on these types of things for you in particular.
Yeah. So I feel like to tell this, I have to go back to like 5-year-old Hannah. And that was me going up to camp with my family and being the one outside flipping over rocks looking for toads.
Nice.
We would call it hoppy toading. And I would do that and I would go look for toads on my own and then just join everybody by the fire and have s'mores. But that was like my favorite thing to do up there. And so I lost a connection to that version of myself over as I was getting older, really. And it really wasn't until 2020, I say, that I went back to that version of myself and really took a deep interest in the natural world and storytelling in that vein, because really up until then, I was traveling full time. So I worked in PR and then ended up leaving that job to pursue photography on my own. And that was a very scary leap in and of itself. And so in that time frame of when I quit my job up until 2020, I was traveling full time. So I was experiencing different cultures and landscapes in a way that I never had before. And I didn't grow up traveling. So I became addicted to this like sense of other and just being kind of in other countries all the time, experiencing different cultures. And then obviously when 2020 came around and the pandemic happened, that side of what I was doing ceased to exist. You could no longer travel. And so I looked for a different creative outlet to kind of satiate that feeling of otherness. And that's really when I turned towards nature and the natural world and hiking and backpacking and critters.
So you're switching from, well, you're taking the leap or the risk of leaving a situation that was at least somewhat reliable, which is subjective nowadays, but you left that behind to pursue full-time photography. What level of, I guess, plan do you remember having before you took the leap to, I guess, arrive at something sustainable, or were you simply taking that risk to follow the thing that felt right?
Well, I will just be totally honest. I definitely wasn't ready. I think if I had waited, I would have been waiting a few more years to actually leave that job. I think I saved $3,000. And luckily at the time I was living at home with my mom, so I wasn't paying rent. I was in my early 20s. I had just, graduated college, obviously had that debt, but nothing else really. And I don't want to say encouraged me, but she believed in me so like wholeheartedly that she was like, if you can do it and make it a year, you can stay here as you're like in between your trips and things like that. If you can make it a year, then you can continue doing this. And so she was really like my biggest supporter in like taking that leap. And travel really, like I said, I hadn't really done it much growing up. And it kind of stemmed from I entered an Instagram contest. This was kind of like at the inception of Instagram. And I had entered an Instagram contest to travel. This sounds insane, to travel to Hong Kong and Thailand with a stranger that I didn't even know. I followed her on Instagram, loved her stuff, thought she was super cool. And I ended up winning that contest. And so I traveled to Hong Kong and Thailand with her for 2 weeks, used all my PTO, and I was still working this job. And from there, the travel is when that's when it snowballed. And that's kind of when I was like, oh, I need to pursue this. I don't know how I'm going to do it. And so I like started just saving some money and putting things aside and kind of starting this plan in my head of like what this next chapter could possibly look like. And I didn't even make it another year into that job before leaving. And I had, like I said, saved $3,000 and booked a one-way ticket to Australia, which is probably the dumbest thing you could do because it's so expensive there. And then the rest is history.
So when you formulate your trips, or because you did this, it seems like a very fly by the seat of your pants at this point in your photography journey. But when you kind of got your feet under you a little bit, what goes into you formulating the next trip or the next story that you want to tell? Because as you say, obviously trips cost money, gear costs money. How did those building blocks start to go for you in terms of what was the gear you were looking to get? What were the trips you wanted to do first to start to build this portfolio that you have now?
Like you said, it was definitely fly by the seat of my pants at first. I traveled quite a bit with friends, but these days I'm definitely far more, I think, what's the word I want to use here? Mm, direct with what I want to do and what I want to see and where I want to go. I think it's deeply connected to what I'm passionate about, which is critters and landscapes and kind of how the two intersect and the way that we influence them. And so it's either dependent if I'm being hired for a job through a client, then I'll plan alongside that client, or I'll plan my trips on my own based on my own interests and preferences. And I feel very lucky to be able to even say that or do that in a time where not many, I think, have that advantage to kind of do that. And I feel very lucky to tell the story of these places and these critters too, especially like looking ahead, hoping to get to see the red wolves in North Carolina and things like that. And that's kind of one of the main places on my radar and one of the main stories I want to tell. But it's this, I think, intersection, like I said, of critters and nature and just this conservation education side of it.
What are some of the things that you would say get hired for? So if a client is hiring you to go somewhere, what's the story, or what are some of the main stories that you're looking to tell? And when you mean the intersection of human and wildlife or human and landscape, what are these images and these trips and all this stuff trying to tell the people who are looking at these shots that you take?
Yeah, it depends definitely on the destination. I think too, like critters can be so politicized in so many ways, but I want to come through these stories and come to it with this kind of providing of education. And oftentimes a client will hire me and we don't discover the story until we're there. And sometimes that's just kind of how it happens. We can have all intentions to tell this one specific story, but then something else beautiful happens or another experience unfolds, and that ends up being the hero story of the trip. So it really just depends on the trip itself, the destination, and honestly, the client. And I feel, again, like very grateful to work with clients that are flexible in that are willing to kind of work with me and allow me to kind of get to the destination and tell the story as authentic as I can, because you can have a plan and go into a place, but then you have an entirely different story. And if you are in kind of these bounds of what the client wants and they're not willing to be flexible, it kind of inhibits storytelling in many ways.
For you personally, because you're the one sharing this and looking through the lens, what are your intentions as you go through? Because there are a lot of photographers that tell their own personal story through the lens as well. So what are some of the things that you like to convey when you go on these trips? And what kind of complexities do you see when you talk about or show the human side of the interactions with wildlife or landscapes of the places you go? And if you can give an example, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, I feel the most beautiful thing about storytelling is that it is so personal, right? Like we all experience life in such different ways, but storytelling is one of the threads where you can communicate something that's almost universal. So I have the ability to capture an image and then write about it, and have somebody receive that image and say, oh, wow, I have that same thought, or, oh, I didn't know that. And so it's almost like storytelling is this universal language in many ways, especially when it's visual. You take away that language barrier and somebody can see the behavior of a coyote in a field mousing. And just that simple act of watching an animal in its natural habitat, doing the thing that it's made to do, kind of breaks down those barriers and hopefully breaks down fears that people might have about this certain animal, or if it's about going to a certain place even.
Yeah, photography is this interesting thing because, a lot of folks take the same photo or similar photos in terms of the elements, but with great photographers, they seem to still communicate something that is strangely unique to them. Even when the logistics are similar or the equipment is similar, what do you sort of credit that to as a photographer, or how does that factor end up there?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, too, it's still a very male dominated industry. So I'm coming into this through the gaze of a female, of a woman, right? So my gaze, my view on the world is innately different just in the way I perceive it. And so I was in Yellowstone with a bunch of photographers. I met a bunch of really wonderful people, and they were all men. And we were both in the same spot. taking pictures of the same critters, yet our photos look entirely different. And sure, some of that definitely has to do with editing, but it also just has to do with you as the photographer being out in the field, making those creative decisions. And I think it's so powerful to be able to go out with a group of people, but you all come back with something different. And I would never want the same photos as somebody else. I don't think I aspire to take the same photos as anyone else, even the photographers that I look up to. I just think there's a lot of power in that individuality, especially through visual storytelling, because you don't know who you're going to reach through your photos. And if you just create carbon copies or create the same images that you see already created, the argument could exist that you're not going to reach a new audience, or you're not going to reach like your audience, so to say.
And how have you, through that, through looking through the lens as a female, as somebody who's in a male-dominated space, what are you seeing in your work over the last 5 years that has made it Hannah Rheaume's? You know what I mean? Your mom is obviously a massive influence. Do you see some of the way that she would just pick up the camera and go? Do you have that kind of ability to just say, I'm going to go and see what happens and sort of throw caution to the wind? Does that sit in there with you at all?
Definitely. I think going into the field with a plan, of course, is so important. But I'm very much a person that I have a couple sets of photos in mind, maybe when I'm going out to shoot for the day, but going out there and just being able to like pick up my camera and find what I find beautiful and capture that is kind of the sweet spot for me. You can want something to happen so bad. You can want this dream photo so bad, but chances of it actually happening are pretty slim. And that's how it is. So yeah, going into the field and just gravitating towards the things that I find beautiful, which honestly, like, it's a process to get there. It's a process to really like curate your eye and capture the things you find beautiful. Because in a way, what I'm capturing is also like me at my core, because like what I find beautiful is the thing that I'm gravitating towards through my lens. So like in a way, in my photos, at least this is how I see it, there's like little pieces of me in it. And just the minimalist approach too is something I really gravitate towards. I just feel like it's soft and quiet and peaceful, and kind of giving people a break from the chaos of the outside world in a way, but also paying homage to this conservation and education side of things.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the thing that I was trying to get at with the last question is each person, they gravitate towards a thing that they find to be beautiful, like you said, or interesting or compelling. And that's kind of what makes a very similar photo look different between eyes.
Absolutely. Like an example of that would be when I was in Yellowstone, we were watching some trumpeter swans on the river. And a photographer next to me that I had just met was taking some photos and had just showed me. And I was like, oh, those are absolutely beautiful. They're super sharp. It's a very beautiful portrait of this trumpeter swan. Meanwhile, I'm sitting right next to him, and I slowed my shutter way down. So I created more of this silhouette image of these trumpeter swans, and just kind of, it's just interesting to kind of see the dynamics of different people and what they gravitate towards. But that would be like a really good example in my mind of kind of showing my approach to photography, especially critters. I always like to push the envelope a little bit.
Critters is my favorite word, so I'm glad you're using critters a lot.
I know. I'm sorry. I use it so much. Wildlife just seems so, I don't know.
Yeah.
Scientific.
Yeah. How much do you consider, I guess, what you might call like a classic sense of quality when you're choosing your photo? So like you mentioned, sharpness, or, just the right, the perfect lighting or the perfect angle. How much do you consider that in your photo selection? Or is it really, as you're navigating through them, you're picking the ones that feel some way to you? Just how important is that? Is that, because I know a lot of photographers, they'll say it's not the camera, it's not the lens, it's not necessarily quality in a classic sense. It's just what it's how the photo emotes.
I would have to agree with that statement, though, is like, it really isn't, it's not about the camera. It's about like the person behind the camera, the one that's pushing the button, because that's the artist, not the camera. And I think when we're talking about like selecting images or even like framing up an image, I'm not a classic photographer in that I follow like rule of thirds and super sharp with like a proper shutter speed and aperture and all of that. I feel like it's it's like a painting. Like I get to create whatever I want behind this lens. This is my art, is this. And so it's creative decisions based on the place I'm in or the kind of, like you said, emotion I want to capture, things like that.
How much does it bother you when someone looks at a photo and says, wow, you have a really nice camera?
To be honest, it's a big gripe because it's like, it's not the camera. It is not like.
You can't say that though. You just got to let it go.
30%.
You got to let it go.
Yeah.
I mean that, to Steven's point, that's such an interesting angle, no pun intended for that, because it's, what does it say to, and we're not, obviously, that this isn't any slight on anybody who looks at, because obviously art is subjective to anybody for anything, painting, photos, whatever it may be.
100%.
So how are you able to explain to people who may not be in photography or in this particular creative space that it's just as similar as somebody who has watercolors or does, pencil drawing and things like that, that it's in the same vein, but even though, yes, you can get the greatest gear on the planet, but like you say, it's all about, like you say, the person behind the lens. How do you explain that to folks who may not fully understand that concept?
Yeah, honestly, I try to, like you said, compare it to painting in many ways. Like you could have many different canvases and many different brushes and many different brands of paint, right? And you can have many different cameras, many different lenses. And it really comes down to the person's skill behind the camera because you're the one dialing all of the dials, pressing the buttons, adjusting your lens, cleaning it, the whole thing, just as the painter is doing everything, like painting the image itself and getting all the paint ready and making their studio the way they want it and things like that. So it's so similar in so many ways. It's just a different, I think, mode of storytelling.
Yeah, it's just you only see the final product, so it's easy to assume that just set a tripod up and click a button and point it at something. But even just minor angle changes with a camera, I mean, just slight angle changes can be a completely different photo.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I think moving my feet has been my greatest ally in photography
100%.
of just finding different angles and going away from the crowds if it is this one specific wildlife encounter and going to find something a little different. And I just don't subscribe to the traditional forms of photography and that like your subject has to be at eye level, certain distance away, certain things like that. Like I love nothing more than, we'll get to it, but it was this grizzly photo and this grizzly, it was a sow and two cubs and she went under the bridge and I was taking photos like from above her and it just shows the size in such a different way. But classically in photography,
you want the hero shot.
You could argue that that's not right.
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
100%.
Is there a way for you, and I've asked this of a couple of photographers we've had on, for you to find your zen or to get into your mode? There seems to be a way for certain photographers, and it seems like you have this knack, at least from the stuff that I've seen on your Instagram, that the shot finds you as opposed to you going to find the shot. Is there a way that you get yourself in the zone, so to speak, to find whatever it is you're looking for? What's that kind of look like for you?
I am very much just what's the word? Like, I feel I need to be in a calm mindset. So I need to kind of get into that mindset by either listening to podcasts or listening to music and kind of just letting the place find me. So driving through, I'll give this example since I'm just coming back, driving through Yellowstone. And the northern range is so vast and there's so much, and arguably it's been photographed hundreds of thousands of times from every single angle you could possibly find. And familiarizing myself in a very calm state of mind with that place is really what gets me in the groove. And of course, like I will take some photos that I look back on, I'm like, what was I thinking here? But then 10 photos later is the photo that I set out to take, or it is the photo that I didn't even set out to take, but ends up being one of my favorites type of thing. So it's all about mindset and showing up calm and just kind of, like you said, like getting in a groove of, okay, I'm out here, I'm doing it. And it's a mindset thing.
That's such a, because we talk about this kind of stuff at the sanctuary when we work with the wolves and wolf dogs that we have, is about getting sort of on their level. And that's such a great way of
Mhm.
explaining that. Going through the place or the landscape or trying to find the critter that you're trying to find is almost to get to that level or that primal or that instinctual part of ourselves that maybe we don't tap into as often. And so
Mhm.
speaking of that, because you brought up the triple lot and we don't want to keep people waiting too long, wait, describe about this trek into Yellowstone recently, because you met up with Leo Leckie, who's a part of our organization, but he obviously does wildlife guiding and things like that. And you guys went to the Rose Creek Acclimation Pen, 30 years later, where they first dropped wolves on the ground. What was that experience like for you with Leo, just getting to that spot and using your photographer mind once you got to a place like that?
It was a very special experience. I was very emotional to be in a place that holds so much history on the 30th anniversary. We hiked to the Rose Creek Acclimation Pens on the 30th anniversary, on the exact day. So just as you're hiking up, you're kind of just, I was thinking about all of the people that have also been here before me, but also like all of the wolves too that were made possible. The wolves we have in Yellowstone today and Montana and Wyoming today are because of these acclimation pens. And to be in a place of such a, a strong historic, I guess, type of angle is just, it was a pinch me moment. And obviously, you guys know Leo, and his storytelling is something out of this world. He is an incredibly talented storyteller. And so as we're hiking up, he's telling me all these stories about the first wolves that were in this acclimation pen, Wolf 9, Wolf 10, and Wolf 7, and kind of about their beginnings and how when the wolves were let out of this pen, the pup Wolf 7 had dispersed on its own, and Wolf 9 and Wolf 10 went to Red Lodge. And Wolf 10 was the male, and he ended up getting illegally shot and killed. And at the same time, Wolf 9 had given birth to 8 pups. One of those pups would become Wolf 21, who became the alpha male of the Druid Peak Pack, which is absolutely bonkers. But when Wolf 9 was recaptured with her pups, they were brought back to the Rose Creek Acclimation Pen. And when they were re-released, Wolf 8 ended up pairing with Wolf 9. And just, I mean, I know you need to know the Yellowstone kind of history of wolves, kind of to connect the dots on the stories there, but it's just, again, just to be in a place of so much history was incredibly special. And to be able to kind of relay that story to others that might not even ever go there or might not even know anything about the acclimation pens. Like, I think about my niece. I am making her a young wolf conservationist right now. She, I think, is just turned 12. And I've sent her so many books and have told her so many stories. And it's just those little things and experiences that I get to have that I'm able to kind of pass on to her and hopefully other younger folks as well.
On this, real quick, before we jump into your photos that you sent us, when you talk about your conservation efforts or your education efforts for when you go to different places, and not just talking about wildlife, but also about human spaces, what's the way that you try to bring folks into the place that you're at so that they understand maybe the issue or the conservation or the humanitarian effort that's happening in these places? Because as you say, storytelling is shot through the camera, but also the person behind it is the one that's sharing the story. So how are you able to relay this to a lot of different sets of people so that they can come hopefully to the conclusion that you want them to sort of gauge
Mhm.
from your storytelling in these photos?
Yeah, honestly, it's a lot of it is bringing it back down to like a very basic human level. And honestly, most times it's an emotional tie, right? Like, we want somebody to be able to resonate with a story. And how do we do that most easily and most directly is usually through our emotions. And so just boiling a situation down to not only the facts, but if we can tie in some sort of relatability to these stories, I find that most people are willing to receive that information and either change their mind on a certain topic or place. And it's through that sort of ability to boil it down where, you're not giving them too much information, or you're not sensationalizing, that's a hard word, your language in a way that that is too much for them, because you want to be able to reach the broad majority of people through storytelling, and that's kind of my approach.
No, I think that's a good through line for everything. I think is just to keep it on that basic, that primal instinctual level. And most people typically, when they take it from that angle, will understand it in that way. So let's get into these photos, because you sent a lot of great stuff. I mean, talk about the bear first, because you sort of teased that before with the sow. Were these all, first of all, were all these taken in the same area? Were they taken in different spots? Because you sent coyote, bear, and some wolves. So were they all in different spots? Where did all these photos particularly come from?
Yeah, so they were all taken in
They were, okay.
Yellowstone, but different areas of Yellowstone. So the grizzlies were taken kind of in the Little America area. The coyote was taken in Hayden Valley, and the wolves were also taken. That photo was taken in Hayden Valley as well.
So so go with the bears and just give everybody kind of like the setup and what your focus was when you get there, because most people, when they see the close up, because obviously you're shooting with a long lens, so I think it's a little bit deceiving.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, "Oh my goodness, you're so close," and that's really not the case.
Oh, this isn't with a 50 millimeter?
No.
It's like you're taking your life in your hands sometimes. Although I've seen some of the stuff for these bear tours in Alaska, and they are right there. So I don't know what.
It's very interesting.
It's wild. But yeah, talk about this trek with the sow and these cubs real fast. And obviously any of the photos all the photos we're talking about, we'll put on our socials so you guys can see when we post about the episode. So you will get to see them. But go ahead and talk about the bears.
Yeah. So, I mean, like any morning I'm out in Yellowstone, it's about wolves. I am setting out to photograph wolves every morning without fail. That is just always my goal. And it's failed more times than I can count, but that's okay. And this morning in particular, I was driving back and forth along the Northeast Entrance Road. There was a carcass, and there was said to be wolves on the carcass. And kind of knowing what I know about the landscape, I figured they'd cross at some point. The wolves never crossed the road, but I did see this brown thing moving in some really tall sagebrush. And I wrote it off as, I was like, oh, it's a bison. Okay, that's fine. So I start photographing this raven right nearby. And which, like, no knock on bison. Bison are really awesome. I had just seen many by this point in the trip. And so I was photographing this raven, and it was wearing a backpack, actually, which is super cool little tidbit, because they're doing some research on the ravens there. So it had antennas sticking out of it, just looked really cool. And I was like, all right, I'm going to get out of the car and just do like one last sweep of the area, see what I can see, bring my Nox out, and just take a look. And all of a sudden, this brown thing gets a little closer to the road. And I look, and I was like, that is a grizzly bear. And then out behind her was two cubs, two very cute, small cubs. And I was like, this day turned around real quick. They ended up crossing the road, going down into a drainage, and I lost them. And then on that same side of the road, there were some bison. Those bison took off running, and all of a sudden I see the bears crest the hill, and they're just walking along the road by the sagebrush and just in perfect view. Safe distance, of course, but they were in the most perfect view, and they eventually made their way down into the river. And then there was this whole, I guess, situation that unfolded with one of the cubs, because one of them was quite smaller than the other, and it had a really hard time crossing the river. And it tried like 4 or 5 times, something like that, and couldn't cross, and eventually got stuck on a log and started climbing up, and it was reunited with the family. And then they just kind of went up the hill and off into the sunset. It was just, that's Yellowstone for you, though.
Yeah, it is. Look at the claws on this sow, though. What an impressive
Yeah.
animal.
At least 5 inches, I'd say.
Just enormous. I've heard people say that sometimes you can hear them touching.
You can hear it clicking on the rocks.
I mean, yeah, look, it is wild. I love this one too, where they're just peeking like they kind of know you're there. They're like, hey, what are you doing? Like that one's like, I think, yeah, that's one of the cubs, or the bigger cub out of the two.
Mhm.
so I mean, they're such impressive animals, like how big
Yeah,
they are.
They
beautiful
really
colors.
Man,
are.
they're unreal. Um, yeah, bears are wild. I know Steven took a bunch when we were in Yellowstone like 2 years ago. He got a couple on the side of the road,
Well, I tried, but we only got to go in the park for
like 2 hours.
20 20 minutes, and we did get some grizzly bear photos, but they weren't.
Oh, they were big.
They were actually. I don't remember what we got. We got a few.
You got a
but there were a
few.
lot of grizzlies out
There
that
were,
trip,
yeah.
but they just weren't very big grizzlies. This grizzly is twice the size of any of the ones we saw.
100%.
She was
Yeah.
very big.
Now, I have to move to the coyote. This one coyote.
Yeah, that one's
This
amazing.
coyote shot. Well, which one are you
I
talking
love
about, Steven? The one where he's looking right at or she's looking at the.
I just love coyotes. I love photos of coyotes.
They're just
so cool.
They're unreal. Like they're just so cool.
They're the coolest. Like, I love wolves.
Sure.
They're one of the cool, like coyotes are one of the coolest animals. Their adaptability. I'm currently reading Coyote America or Coyote, however you pronounce it, Coyote America. Highly recommend. It is fascinating. Their adaptability is out of this world.
I mean, it's like they have no inhibition to it, or they're so just like, oh, okay, like we're gonna check out and see like what the people are doing. That's what coyotes remind me of. They're just like kind of the nosy neighbor. They just sort of go from house to house and they're like, oh, what are you doing? All right, well, this is boring. We're gonna move on. So like, I mean, was
Yeah.
this the same? This was the same trip, Hannah, or was this a different situation with this one in particular?
This was this coyote photo I took just this last
Okay.
trip. And it was an interesting story. We were told of this coyote, we were told of two fox, about a half mile up the road from our current position. So we make our way to go see the fox. It's one sitting, one's all curled up. They're being super cute. And, you get a safe distance to the fox in order to take some photos, and you don't crowd it. You don't want to make it too scared, but it was in a good, safe distance away. So it was me and another photographer, and we're just kind of watching. And all of a sudden I see some movement on the other side of the road, and it's a coyote, and it's just mousing on this hillside. Well, coyotes, being like the curious animals that they are, had to come over and check out the commotion, check out what was going on. And this was to the fox's detriment, of course. The coyote locks eyes on the fox, both of them, and immediately goes right for them. It was this insane commotion. I have some photos I'll also add to the drive of the fox that I got booking it through the snow. I've never experienced such a thrilling encounter in a way that just felt like I shouldn't be witnessing this right now. This is like nature at its absolute finest unfolding in front of me. And you could say the coyote was hunting the fox or just chasing it, playing with it, whatever you want. And it posed for maybe 30 seconds on this hillside right in front of me with the mountains in the background. And I snapped as many photos as I possibly could. And it was like, it's a dream photo I never knew I had, because it just was that eye contact when you look into the eyes of a wild animal, especially like a coyote, is just, it's like ancestral in many ways, because they've adapted alongside humans for so long. And you're just sitting here in the 21st century with this wild canid that's been around forever. And you have this moment and then it's gone and you never get it back. It's just, it's like primal.
Yeah, I think that's how we felt when we saw the elk, the wolves taking down an elk. And I think was that our first day? I don't even remember.
That was our first day. That was in the morning.
I don't even know how to describe it, really. It just felt odd to be watching it, this predator-prey dynamic that's existed for hundreds of thousands of years and without fail keeping these species alive. This kind of engagement or participation.
Well, too, it's this dichotomy of like our humanness of we care about the elk, but we also care about the wolves. And it's like this emotional side of who we are as just like a species, right? Of like, oh, wow, I don't want this elk to die, but I want these wolves to survive and hunt and get what they need. And it's so interesting because I feel the same way. I felt so bad for the fox. And I was like, oh, I don't want to see, because it would have been, if this coyote had gotten this fox, it would have been the third fox of this one trip alone that I had seen hunted by coyotes. And I was like, oh, I don't want this fox to die at the hand of the coyote. But the coyote needs to eat, So it's like this constant.
Yeah, I think we have to be strong enough or introspective enough not wanting something to get hurt, which is a very natural thing, but
Mm-hmm.
also we have to celebrate the fact that predator prey dynamics have made every single thing possible.
Yeah.
I mean, from the minute life formed, predator prey dynamics have caused evolution. They're the
And they're the only
drivers.
reason. Yeah, and predator prey dynamics are also the only reason we exist in the way we do today
Yeah.
The only
as
reason.
humans.
But to your point, Stephen, and to you too, Hannah, is that the cycles of nature are violent. Whether it doesn't even have to be predator prey dynamics. You can just look at the tornadoes, natural disasters, fires that we just went through in LA. Like, that's the earth regenerating itself and cleansing itself, and it's a violent process, and it doesn't have to be, just looking at predator on prey, but yeah, it's violent, and it's beautiful in the same sense, because like you said, Hannah, that you're feeding one species but also keeping another healthy so that the cycle can continue. Otherwise we don't have that. And it's great to hear the story behind the story of the photo, because that we look at the coyote photo and say, oh my God, that's a great shot. It could have ended with, well, it just stood and posed for 30 seconds. But you had to lead up to that, which is there's so much more behind that, which is always great to hear.
And it's obviously, it comes across as aggressive, but in reality, it's just the highest form of intelligence that just wants more and more life to occur. But for more and more life to occur, there's this transitioning of that we call death, right? It's like there's it's just all necessary. We look out at beautiful things and we think the other things are contrary to those things, but really that the contrast is, it's simply an element of the things that are obviously easy to appreciate.
Yeah, 100%.
And also, I feel too like this is the core of where it gets really difficult in conservation conversations and education, right? It's this, you say one thing about death in an animal, of it being hunted, we'll say of an elk, and then you have other people that are angry the elk has died, and they're coming at you for shedding light on this cycle that happens inevitably, because these animals need to feed as well. So it's an interesting a cycle to be in of educating in a way where it can be received to the point we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. It gets even, I guess, more confusing or more nuanced than that, or more conflicting than that, because those of us who hunt, we have to kill an animal to arrive at meat. At least the meat that we consider to be the healthiest food that we can get. But you'd think that unanimously would be okay with the idea that predators eat the same animals but have different tools. But there is this widespread judgment from people who eat animals of how wolves, lions, coyotes eat, how they hunt. To me, it's just too hypocritical to entertain, or that moral high horse thing is problematic to me. And it's sort of confusing how uncomfortable we are with it, even as meat eaters who should really understand these things.
I agree. And I think when we take it to our meat industry as well. I mean, I'm not trying to have a full-blown political conversation right now, but like we're there. And and the thing is like when we look at our meat industry, like we're doing the exact same thing these wolves are doing. We're sustaining our family, and we are arguably slaughtering hundreds of thousands of cattle a year. And it's how are we any different than the wild animals on our landscape that also hunt? Just because we are at the top of the food chain, that makes us different? I don't really think that's a valid argument. But I just had to get that off my chest.
No, it's fine. Yeah, and and like you said, it's valid to say that. And it's all, like I said, it's all cyclical and it's all in the cycle of what we're talking about. I think we saved the best for last. Or no, not the best for last. I won't say that.
Yeah, I love
Coyote's
the coyote.
pictures are great.
That's my favorite.
The coyote's great. These wolf shots, I didn't realize these were yours, by the way, especially the wolf, or maybe I did and I forgot, and I apologize for that. The wolf that's crossing the road, right in front of that, I think it's a Yukon or something. I didn't realize that was yours. And then you sent the videos, look like they got edited today, which are stunning as well. So same trip, different, it's probably a different trip because there's no snow on the ground. But I guess talk about the videos, which we'll try and post some of these if we can. but
Mhm.
there's a familiar voice, obviously, because you're Rick McIntyre and Bob Landis, and they were there. What was this whole situation like? Up, was this the Wapities as well that you got these videos of?
So those videos to the scope are actually of the
The junctions.
junctions,
Okay.
and I took those videos on, ooh, what date was it? I think the 8th, and January 8th of this year. And so obviously with the passing of 907F and her alpha male, which I think is assumed that he's passed. I'm not sure if it's been totally confirmed, but they're under the assumption that he is also passed. So you've got this restructuring of a pack right now. And the Junction Buttes are probably one of the more famous wolf packs in the park right now, just because of their visibility from Slough Creek area. And so for those that aren't familiar, 907F has passed away, obviously, and she was the matriarch of that pack. And with this restructuring, I think there's just been a lot of people on edge of what's going to happen next. And I believe 2 rescues have since joined the Junction Butte pack. And so what you're seeing in these videos are the Junction Butte pack as it is right now, kind of just gathering and hanging out, being wolves down in a pond area, and I had the privilege to observe them, and it was just really cool to see a pack and its resilience to just continue on. And that's just what they do. They continue on, and they're wolves, and they make it all work. And to kind of be in this limbo stage of the pack and kind of witness it was super cool, because there's not been a definite new alpha pair or breeding pair kind of set in stone yet. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that unfolds as
Man,
well.
that's wild. So Yellowstone obviously is a great place for you. What is something that you're looking forward to, is because we're fresh into 2025? What sort of a bucket list or a planned place that you have that's on your schedule coming up? Because I know and again, thank you for squeezing us in your schedule, because you're always so busy and you're all over the place. What's the next stop for you? Is it international? Is it domestic? What's your plan going forward here in 25?
Yeah, I'm going back to Yellowstone again here pretty soon. And I think probably the soonest thing that I will do other than Yellowstone will be to go see the red wolves in North Carolina. I feel very called to go there and photograph these wolves because there are less than 25 in the wild. It's absolutely mind blowing how endangered they are just in the wild. And I think to capture their story is like a conservation, I don't know, a moment in time that we might not have for much longer. So to tell their story will be super special. On my bucket list, as I'm sure y'all can guess, it's all related to wolves. I'd love to go to see
Yeah,
the sea
us
wolves
too.
on Vancouver Island. I want to get up to Churchill and see the wolves of the Casca Coast. I know you guys have had Jad on. He does some incredible citizen science programs up there, which he's doing such great work. So I'd love to go up there and see that. And probably the most far reaching thing that I would love to do one day is to go to Ellesmere Island and see the Arctic
Right.
wolves.
You basically hit
Yeah, we got
3 of
those
our
on our
top
list.
5, I think, places we want to go. Yeah, we got to go.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we're trying to make those
Right
moves
now.
happen, but it's a little tough.
I'll
All right,
go-
now, but we'll.
I'll go right now.
Let's go.
Oh yeah, let's
I'll
do.
go. We can all go.
Okay, we're gonna tell everybody like, hey, Hannah's gonna be along here, so maybe we'll do that. You might be the one
Perfect.
to be able to get us the funding for that.
Yeah.
So obviously, for anybody who's listening, they can follow you on Instagram. Give everybody the best places to look at your portfolio, to see the gear that you're using. Actually, before you do that, give young or even old people who are just getting into photography, what's a tip from you that you would give to them, no matter what it is? It doesn't have to be wildlife. It can just be photography in general. What's a tip you would give them if they're just starting out or they're stuck in the middle of whether to do this as a career or profession?
Yeah, I would say just pick up a camera and start taking photos. just whatever camera you have, it doesn't matter. It can be your phone. You can compose beautiful images with a phone camera. I'm a firm believer in that. You don't have to have the fanciest of the fancy equipment. Get out there and just shoot as much as possible, all the things that you find beautiful, and document it and keep track of your work and see how it progresses over time. And if it is something you truly want to pursue as a career, just know that it takes work and practice, and you're constantly evolving. I can't even tell you how, even from last year, I look at images from 2024 and I just think about what I would do different. I'm constantly critiquing my work, but that is where you get better, is if you're open to critiquing yourself and your imagery and just committed to getting better with each photo you take, you can make this a career. I'm a firm believer in that.
Hannah is Hannah's mom to all of you who are listening. So just be aware. She's the one telling you all to do the thing you want to do. So anybody who's out there wants to be a photographer, go for it. That being said, tell everybody where they can check out all of your work, follow you on your adventures. What's the best way that they can do that?
Definitely. I post a lot on Instagram at Hannah Rheaume. I'm sure y'all will link that in the show notes. I'm not going to spell my last name. And then my website, hannahscamera.com. I post a lot of photos in my portfolio there. And then I do a little section called Stories from the Road, where I do some of these deeper dives into some of my photos that have a bit of a deeper story, just because, Instagram doesn't really give you as many characters as you might need to tell a story. And I also am going to be posting some group trip announcements. I'm hosting a photo workshop in May coming up here shortly to Yellowstone. So I'm very excited. So all that will be kind of on my website or on Instagram.
Awesome. I love it. You're very busy and you're doing all this wonderful stuff. This is tremendous. Last thing for you, Hannah, when you hear the word wolf, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
Wow. I've heard you ask this question. I listen to this podcast weekly. I look forward to it. And I've heard you ask this question. Every answer you get on this podcast is just, it makes me feel something, right? And I thought about it a lot because I know you guys asked this. And to me, it's human. I think of wolves, I think of human, not just for conflict, right? But for all of the good things that wolves are as well. And that is, they care for their young, they're sentient, they live in family groups, they hunt cooperatively, they nanny the young, they problem solve, they do all of these things we do. And I think that connection is missing so much in these wolf conversations that we're having, is they are so similar to us.
That's incredible. Yeah, you've explained wolf connection to a degree. It's incredible. Really, just thank you so much, Hannah, for the photo journey and giving people the like you said, the direction to go and live out their dream. And clearly, this is working out for you, and your storytelling is wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all these wonderful things.
Thank you so much for giving me this platform and just for doing all that you all do out there. It makes me emotional. So thank you so much.
We appreciate you so much. Hang tight while we sign off. How's to you all out there? We'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody. Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Please visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer.